All right.
So we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Train the Advocate. My name is Angela, and I am the Faith Advocacy Director. And we do Train the Advocate at least once a month, usually. So today I'm excited that we're going to have two of my colleagues here and discuss how to effectively engage faith communities. Afterwards, you will receive this in you'll receive a follow-up email and you will get this recording in it. And this is set up like a Zoom meeting. So we'll go through the presentation and then we'll come back together as a large group and people can ask questions. If you want to, you can put in the chat where you're from, just so we can see who's in here, see if there's other people in your state that are interested in learning more about stuff. You can go to the next slide, Zena. So just a few tips during this presentation. Please keep yourself muted and silence your cell phones. Again, we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. And this presentation is just for general information. So sometimes you have somebody very specific that you want to talk about, especially if it's a health issue related to end-of-life care. I do just want to highlight that we do have our end-of-life consultation program. And so we can connect you with our end-of-life consultants if you have a personal um, health concern or a loved one who has a health concern that you want to talk about and how to address that. And then just some group agreements. So please use I statements and speak from your point of view. Life happens, but try to minimize distractions. Build upon and try not to repeat others. And then move up and move back. So just allow equal airtime for everybody to join the conversation. And then we always start every presentation with our mission statement, which you'll see on the screen right here. So our mission is that Compassion and Choices improves care, expands options, and empowers everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. So we believe in patient-directed care, where patients and their healthcare providers work together as a team, and individuals are informed about what their healthcare options are, and they get to choose based on their own individual and priorities along with your healthcare team, right? So your healthcare team should not be making decisions about your care without you. And now I want to introduce our speakers today. So Zena Regis, do you want to wave, Zena? So Zena is our Director of Faith Engagement at Compassion and Choices. And before her current role, Zena served as a hospice chaplain and grief care coordinator for almost a decade. And then Isabella Carr, give us a wave, thank you. Isabella is our 2024 Engagement Fellow at Compassion and Choices. She is a graduate student at Harvard Divinity School and the founder of Death Fact Doula. In her doula practice, she addresses end-of-life concerns most relevant to fat people and their loved ones. And now I will hand it over to you two.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you everyone for being here. I wanted to start, I'm so happy that you are all here to talk about this topic because it's one of the things that I love to talk about. But I wanted to begin with why even start this conversation? Why engage faith communities? One of the things that comes up often when we send out information about the faith work that we're doing, I will get emails back from supporters and advocates all over the country who are like, why? And a lot of the feedback I'll get is, those are the people who are trying to stop our movement. So why is Compassion Choices focusing so much on this community, on the faith community? Because often people view faith communities, religious folks as the opposition. And so for us, faith communities are really a natural home for end-of-life conversations, planning, and support. And people often turn to their faith communities for transition. So it makes sense that they would turn to their faith communities for end-of-life conversations. And it's really a place where people are already having these conversations. And also, we really want to combat the idea that it's people of faith who are our opposition, because a lot of the research says that 67% of people of all faiths support medical aid in dying. 70% of Catholics, 59% of Christians, 53% of Protestants, 70% of all other religions. And we have found that we just have a very vital community of faith leaders who are engaged in our movement. So, first of all, why we do this work is creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive movement. I find that often people don't know about our movement. And so when we engage faith communities to tell them what we're doing and why, people want to get engaged in one way or another. And so part of our faith outreach is part of our larger community engagement strategy. It is really creating a large and inclusive movement. Also, community and connections. A lot of research shows that people who are engaged in faith communities are engaged in their communities in larger ways. So there's a big connection between engagement in a religious affiliation and also being engaged in civic matters writ large. I was just listening. This is a little bit of a segue. I mean, a little bit of a tangent, but um, when I was in college, I read this book, Bowling Alone, by Robert Putnam. And I don't know why that book has stuck with me. Like, it was over 20 years ago that I read it, but I think of it often. And then I was in the car a couple of days ago, and Robert Putnam they were doing kind of like, it's been 25 years since you wrote this book. What do you think about your thesis now? But one of the things he shared in that interview was that, like, people who are connected to their community in face-to-face, in-person engagement often tend to be people who are engaged in a lot of other things. So he was saying that it's not like people who are part of a bowling league are also part of a faith community, are also part of the Rotary Club. Like, it's really something, and that's what we find with a lot of our community connections in faith communities, is that people who have a religious affiliation are often involved in civic conversations in much larger ways as well. And so that's another important aspect of this work. And also, we think about the shared ideals that no often what people believe in their particular theologies are guided by these larger ideas. And so, when we were coming up with this particular graphic, there was ideas about, like, including different religious symbols from different faith groups. And what people kept coming back to is really it's about love, compassion, and faith. This movement is about these three things. And when it is grounded and taken to those ideas and those shared values, so many people can get on board. This is just a very limited sampling of the faith communities that we've worked with, either doing workshops with, attending their expos, doing webinars with. As you can see, it's very diverse faith groups: United Church of Christ, Unity Fellowship Community, National Baptist Convention, Unitarian Universalist Association, the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, Eastside Jewish Commons, Faith and Grief, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and there are so many more. But we really try to work with a diverse group of faith leaders and faith communities to really talk about our work. And I also always have to give the Unitarian Universalists a big shout out, because since 1988, they have had a general resolution supporting our movement. And it's interesting. Sometimes I'll present to UU congregations and they'll be like, I didn't even know that. And so I really love to shout that out, that there was a general resolution by the Unitarian Universalist community. And so they have been especially supportive of our work. So I'm going to shift a little bit to talking about what we've learned. I have been in this role of faith engagement for a couple of years, and almost exactly 2 years. And so this is what we've learned when we about faith engagement in this time. We can really often begin with the financial, legal, medical, which are really, really important. But when we talk about end of life care, that's where we start. We can start by, like, giving people documents and telling them to fill them out. And what I have found in conversation with people is we can start in a different place. Start with story. Often in workshops, I will start with what is a good death? What have you seen as a good death? And that always gets people talking about what is a good death they've seen in their either in their family or their friend circle. What do they imagine would be a good death for them? And so that story often gets so quickly beyond like our labels of who we are. Um, I just met with an elected, well, a candidate for elected office here. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and he wanted more information about what we do because he said he was talking to someone who was on a completely who's in a different party. They have so many things that are not in common, but he said they started talking about um, this man who is caring for his spouse who has a terminal illness. And he said so quickly that broke through all of our differences. And so we had this commonality about how we think about what control and agency and dignity looks like in death. And so he was reaching out to be like, I'd love to learn more about what you do because I think this is a bipartisan issue that anyone can connect with. And that was Story. He had this experience where he was talking to someone and they were telling their story and they were able to connect there. Also, meaning. In my role as a chaplain, we talked a lot about meaning making, but really it's this idea of really making room for meaning and story and connection in all phases of our life. But I really see it as a place that something that we can really talk about when we're talking about the advanced care planning process, because we're not just talking about um, these end of life decisions. We're talking about our life, we're talking about our story, we're talking about the people who are important to us, we're talking about what matters most. Um, Additionally, talking about community. Often we can talk about advanced care planning and end of life planning in this really individualistic way, but talking about it in community and about our larger communities can really just be a different entry point to the conversation. I often talk with people in many faith communities who are like, I don't really I mean, I'll deal with death when I get there. I'm not worried about my own comfort or my own suffering. What I'm worried about is my family, and how my suffering or how my end of life experience will impact them. That comes up so often. And so just thinking about how we talk about community, spirituality, and life review in the end of life planning. One of the things that I have found, and Isabella is going to talk a lot more about this, like the different things that we can do. Um, but having people together, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, but having people together, having this end of life conversation just always makes for such a rich conversation. You get beyond small talk very quickly when you are talking about end of life issues. And so that's what I find in my workshops. People are engaging in this shared language. There's this one congregation, I did a Getting Your House in Order series. And so for about a month, I did different conversations in advanced care planning. And now they use that language. I just had the pastor reach out to me and say, they will say, Roger, have you finished your advanced directive? Like to one another, or have you done this? Have you done that? Have you had this conversation with your physician? And so it's really just changed it from an individual conversation to a communal conversation. So I want to talk about how you start a conversation with a faith community. Often people come to me and they're like, what do I say when they say this? Um, and so part of it is just focusing on listening and understanding where people are, rather than engaging in theological debates. I can engage in a theological debate with the best of us, but that often doesn't change hearts or minds about our issue. Um, and like I started talking about earlier, personal stories and experiences are just excellent connectors about these issues. Having people, almost everyone has a story about end of life in some type of way. And so those can be an excellent connector. Using factual position to our movement is often misinformation. Like people have these real they don't have all the facts about what we're doing and why. And so I often start most of my conversations with this is what medical aid in dying is. This is what VSED is. This is what an advance directive can and can't do. A death panel is not a real thing. Like all of these things, and that just starts the conversation in a different place because we're able to start with real information and real data versus the misinformation that can be in the ether. And also, it's an opportunity to really seek to understand different theological and cultural and ethical perspectives on end of life care, and like just why. What are people thinking, and where does that come from? Um, we had a panel at Compassion Choices. I'll have to I'll add it, or maybe I'll send it out in the follow-up, where people were talking about common theological rebuttals. And one of our panelists said something so powerful. Someone asked, like, when somebody says, like, this is about sanctity of life, or this is about whatever, whatever, how do I, argue against that? And the panelist said, we first start by asking the question, are you willing to have a conversation about it? And then you see where people, if they're willing to have a deeper conversation about these things that may initially seem like disagreements, but in the course of a conversation are often not. Um, and this is where to start. I'm sure many of you already are connected to faith communities or know people who are, but a great place to start is, where do the faith communities in your area stand on other issues? Um, just in my work with Compassionate Choices, I've been able to see, like, where does this particular denomination fall on reproductive justice, or where are they in healthcare equity? A lot of times, larger denominations have their policy statements and their lobbying and legislative priorities on their website. So you can often see, like, is this a community that is going to be sympathetic or just really interested in what we're doing? Um, I often connect around, do exhibiting with faith communities around health fairs. Many faith communities in my area will do health and wealth expos or community resource fairs. And primarily, what we are at Compassion and Choices is a resource. And so I am often in these areas, and people are excited about the information. Like, oh, thank you. This end of life decisions guide is a conversation I need to be having with my family. Thank you for having that or pointing that out. So, how can we be a resource, and what events are already happening? Um, what are there ecumenical or interfaith opportunities for engagement that are happening? There are often um, interfaith fairs that are happening, or conversations that we can bring our mission to. Um, we have a large interfaith gathering of like a dinner, an interfaith dinner. And so I sponsored one, Compassion and Choice sponsored one. And these are people from, like, these are rabbis and priests and pastors and imams. And we had a conversation about what is a good death. And so that's a great place to start when we're doing our advocacy. And thinking about, how can you support initiatives that faith communities are already involved in? Um, that is often where I start. Like, I just attended a reproductive justice brunch for faith communities. And a lot of people were like, oh, now I see how this issue fits in with reproductive justice, or I'm interested in the alignment that these issues have. So that can be another way of getting involved. And then these are just a few little, like, partnership things. I s- m- Faith communities are often approached to get involved with different things for many of the reasons that I have already outlined. Um, I know there's the big joke about all of the politicians coming around election time to all the congregations to get their support. And so one of the things that I try to really emphasize with our partners is that we are not just here for a one and done, like, we are a partner. And so when things come up in your congregation and you need support, we're here for that. And so really moving at the speed of trust with our partners, just meaning making sure that I can communicate to them that I am a partner that will be there with them. So when end of life issues come up, when they need different information on this, I will refer them to our EOLC, our end of life consultants. When they're like, I have I have somebody in my congregation that's dealing with this. I don't know where to start, or just being a reservoir of information. Really collaborating with faith leaders to co-create initiatives that might support end-of-life options. This is our opportunity to also get creative. When you listen and find out where people are, what people are going through or what they're dealing with. Um, I had a conversation with one faith leader, and he was like, "My people keep dying any without any advanced care planning." And so that causes conflict in the family. And so they call me because they're in conflict, when really it would be better if they just had some of these conversations up front. And so knowing that's what he was dealing with, I was able to do a series of workshops in the congregation around advanced care planning so people could have these conversations prior to a crisis. And so he wouldn't be called in for the conflict. So he is forever a partner now, because he was very grateful that we were able to come in free of charge and give that information. Similarly, working together to address the needs and concerns of the faith community regarding end-of-life care and resources. A lot of times that's what people want, is they just want resources and referral lists. And like, if I'm having this, who do I call? And being able to be a partner and provide that can be a really great way of creating just collaborations. Also, making it easy. Um, a lot of the faith leaders I work with want to be a great resource for their communities, but they are taxed. And so, me coming in saying, I can do a program on this and it's done, is often really welcome. To say, like, I don't have to do anything. You're going to show up, you're going to bring the end of life decisions guides, you're going to like bring the sign-in sheet, you're going to do all those things. That can also just be an amazing thing. And you're going to facilitate the conversation. And Isabella is going to talk about easy ways to do that. But yeah, really just making it easy. When I'm working with faith communities, that's what I do. I'm like, I can come in and take it over from here. Um, and then, like I said, maintaining ongoing connection, knowing that when something comes up with Compassion and Choices, letting them know, like, this is coming up. I'd love to stay connected, or we're having this event or this webinar that might be of interest to you. Um, and that also keeps the connection, so that when we need a testimony from a faith leader for an action or initiative, we have that because we've already built that ongoing relationship. And this last one is, stay in contact with me around when you need support or resources. Like, if you say, there's a faith community that I'm connected to, and I'd like to do a program and I'm not sure what to do, or I would just like to provide pizza, and we don't have the budget for that. Like, reach out to me. I can definitely, that's something we love to do, is just be able to support your ongoing engagement and work. Or if you're like, I would like to host this, but don't know how to do it, can you do it? Would you be open to, coming or doing a webinar? I had some faith leaders in Tennessee reach out, and it was a small congregation, and he had been a supporter of Compassion and Choices. And he said, I really want you to come and do a workshop, but I don't feel like my congregation is large enough to warrant like the resources that it would take for you to get here. Um, and so what we ended up doing is inviting all the local area faith communities, and had like a larger workshop. And I was able to come out and give resources. And so those kinds of things can really happen easily. Um, so now I'm going to turn it over to Isabella to talk about some of the ways that we can really make it easy for these types of connection.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to share some really simple kind of ideas to hopefully get you thinking
And
about
Isabella, introduce yourself. I forgot to do that at the
yes.
beginning.
Oh, I was introduced at the beginning for those of you who didn't hear it or came a little bit later. I'm Isabella Carr, and I am the 2024 Compassion and Choices Engagement Fellow. So I am a graduate student at Harvard University, the Divinity School, and I am also a death doula. So I work closely with people and their loved ones, end of life at a kind of variety of stages. And I specialize in the unique needs of fat people. So just from kind of talking about funeral planning, end of life options, all the way to, interment, burial, as well as emotional, spiritual, and theological support. And I'm here to talk about some great ideas of how you can engage your local community. So a couple just overview of ways you can start thinking about this. So however your congregation or your community likes to get a hold of each other and talk. So bulletins, newsletters, listservs, you know, tack it up on the board in your church or in your congregation. You can also think about workshops, guest speakers, game nights, a couple organizations I'll talk about a little bit later, Death Over Dinner, Death Cafes, which are all wonderful ways to have a kind of built out format that you can just use and augment to your specific needs. And you can also think about larger community-wide events similar to what Zena talked about. You can think about book reading, book clubs, movie nights, things of that nature. So a quick example would be just to place a survey in your congregation's newsletter and get a sense of what people are most interested in. And like Zena's mentioned, talking about death, thinking about end of life is not just the medical, it's not even just the theological, spiritual, but it can be a lot of different things for people to really tap into some of these questions and start talking about something that is not always comfortable. So depending on what people say, you can bring in someone like CNC or like Zena to come and lead a workshop. You can think about starting small with a game night or movie night and be in communication with your faith leaders about how to address maybe some of the theological questions that come up and make sure you represent the congregation as a whole. Next slide, please. So one of those examples, which I wanted to share, and there's a great webinar by Lisa Paul, who is one of the co-founders of the Death Deck that CNC has from the last year, which is on the website. I really recommend. So the Death Deck is a really simple, kind of friendly game that has a lot of questions that will help you get kind of tapped into what some of your values are and the values of your loved ones or members of your congregation or your community about end of life. So a really easy event format would be just to host a game night. Like Zena said, get some refreshments, some pizza. You can have other games too, puzzles, things like that, but try to work in these kind of end of life conversations in a more normal way. Or something you can do is just, if you have a deck, you can have it be a small game that you play with maybe a few close friends, your family, your loved ones, but it's a great way to start identifying these kind of common threads around end of life. Next slide. Death Over Dinner. So I loved that Zena mentioned her interfaith dinner, perfect kind of segue into something like this. So the Death Over Dinner format is a great way to encourage people to have a conversation in a really convivial, warm, kind of breaking of the bread manner. So an example of this would be to pick something important to your community or congregation. Maybe that's a special kind of cultural food or a holiday coming up that has a lot of kind of traditional foods. Or another example is to ask people to bring a family recipe from an ancestor that they have lost to really kind of tie in this theme of end of life and whatever is important to your community or culture. Next slide, please. And then Death Cafe. So this is another idea as well, and another organization which you can go onto their website and they provide a ton of formats. This is also a way, if you're not quite ready to host an event at your own community or your own congregation, but you want to start thinking and talking about death, there are death cafes all over the world. So you can look on their website and see who has listed a death cafe. You can always join just independently, come and talk and get a sense of what these conversations are like, things that you feel are useful to you that you want to bring back to your community. So I really recommend that, even if you're not quite ready to host your event. Then, like Zena said, you can also work with bringing in doulas, which there are great in Nelda and Nita. There are tons of resources that will give lists of doulas in your area. You can bring in chaplains, like Zena said, Compassion and Choices staff or engagement team to come and talk. Other death care professionals, if you get to a point where you want to think about series or other kind of topics based on maybe survey responses. If someone's really interested in some of the kind of medical questions or legal questions, you can coordinate with local experts in your area, professionals who might be willing to come and talk to your congregation. So these are just a couple different ways that you can start to engage people and think through these big questions that come up, whether it's really, really practical stuff and like many of you are familiar with, and Zena mentioned again, there's Compassionate Choices has toolkits, has an end-of-life resource guides, all of those kind of things, which are really accessible, and I believe are online and free for people to download. So you can pull those up and start to use that to guide some of your questions, and start to think through some of the events. I don't have a sample survey. I see, Linda, your question in the comments, but I can absolutely look for some samples, and maybe we can compile one that we can send to registrants of some questions that might be helpful. And next slide, please. And then a couple other ideas, which are a great way for you to also start thinking about end of life, and are also things that you can bring to your community and congregation, would be like a book club or a movie night. So these are some examples that other congregations have used that you can create into a series really easily, and you can bring in a lot of different themes throughout the series. So it might not have to be as perhaps like on the nose as something like Take Me Out Feet First, which is a great documentary series that came out very recently. It's on Amazon Prime, and it was made in partnership with Compassionate Choices, and it's about people's end of life options. I think there's 6 different episodes. So you can do something like that and screen it, or you can also bring in other movies or TV shows or series that touch on topics of grief, end of life, loss. In this kind of vein, there's another event coming up with CNC in August, which is about loss and ambiguous kind of loss with Pauline Boss. So that's another thing to kind of think about as a tool or a resource. There's also books you can bring in too. So Finish Strong is a very important book at CNC, and it's about putting your priorities first at life's end, and by the CNC President Emerita, Barbara Coombs Lee. So this is a great book, and I just finished reading it as part of my fellowship assignment, and it was really, really powerful to start thinking through what inspired CNC and some of the kind of thinking behind the advocacy efforts that's gone into medical aid and dying resources, and to make that accessible to people throughout the US. Yeah, so these are just some examples. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of books and movies on end of life and grief and loss. So this is a really fun way you can get people to get involved, submit things that are important to them, books, movies that have really resonated. Next slide. And then some webinars and stories that have already come out that I think would be worth a watch if you had not already seen them. And these are just part of CNC's huge collection and archive of past events. So there's some really great ones that are focused on different kind of faith leaders, spiritual issues that come at end of life. So I highly recommend these ones. And then Rabbi Sarah Runson's story is just one that you can read. It's just a published on the website as opposed to a webinar, but also a really important look at the kind of Jewish faith and how medical aid and dying and different kind of end of life concerns are relevant. People who are Jewish. Next slide. And then Catholics for Compassion. You know, we have hopefully an event coming up soon.
Yes, we do. Catholics for Compassion is an initiative for that we started through Compassionate Choices, specifically for our Catholic supporters. And so we have an event coming up soon. And so stay tuned. We'll have more around that coming up. But if you're interested, please let me know, because I would love for this group meets quarterly-ish. So I would love to add you to that mailing list if you're interested in it. All right, it looks like we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers, but this is our Compassionate Choices is almost exclusively supported by donors like you. So here is the information on how to be a supporter. I know many of you are, and so we are so grateful for your support and your donations, because they are what make our work possible. These are some things that are coming up. Train the Advocate that Isabella mentioned, 109, Navigating Ambiguous Loss, with Dr. Pauline Boss. Angela, is there anything you'd like to say about this upcoming or anything?
No, not really.
Just wanted to make sure.
Gina and I were just talking about, I'll just share, I first met Dr. Pauline Boss in my prior role, I was at a caregiver conference and she came to speak, and the people that were there were all caregivers for a loved one had dementia, and they were caring for their loved one that had dementia. And it's really, I mean, there are so many examples of what ambiguous loss is, and really, I think I know Bill, I was talking to Bill when we first got on, but when I sent it out that this was happening, Bill immediately responded saying that he was excited for it. And I think it was two pastors at your church just recently died, and you wrote a letter to the congregation talking about ambiguous loss and kind of like the feelings of it. But yeah, I think it'll be really helpful. Any loss, I really feel like you're going through, and the myth of closure, in that we don't really, I think we're always thinking that we need to find closure, when in fact it really doesn't exist when you lose somebody, like you're always gonna feel grief and sorrow sometimes, and hopefully it lightens up, but you're always gonna remember them, and there's never that absolute closure. And then in September, we're doing Train the Advocate 104 on advanced care planning. So just the basic advanced care planning, having the conversations. Is this the last slide, Zena?
Yeah, it's just we go.
Well, yeah. So I'll just share too, with the advanced care planning, because I was at a conference in California where we have passed medical aid in dying. And the woman who was from the Catholic Church, and she oversees like all these Catholic hospitals, talking about finding common ground, Zena, and she shared that when the California End of Life Option Act passed, this is the law in California that authorizes medical aid in dying, and it passed in 2016. I don't think she expected this, but she was like, when that passed, she thought, oh no, we better go tell people, what it is that we believe in at the end of life. And we started hosting a bunch of advanced care directive programs. And I was just like, that is so great, right? Like, because we know that less than 1% of people in states where it's authorized use medical aid in dying. And really so much of what we want to do is just have these conversations in general about end of life, so that everybody, like you were sharing, Zena, I had a similar thing when my grandmother died. There was a ton of family fighting afterwards, and nobody spoke to each other for a year. And had we had some discussions ahead of time, I think a lot of that could have been resolved. So when we talk about, one of the things we talk about too, when we talk about medical aid in dying, is when medical aid in dying laws pass, end of life care and advanced care planning, that all improves. And I just thought that was a perfect example of it. Even though she is completely opposed to medical aid in dying, she went out and started having these workshops around advanced care planning. So I'll open it up to questions now.
Excellent. And I was just piggybacking off what you said, Angela. There are some congregations where I don't talk about medical aid in dying at all. Either they're in a state that's not authorized and it's nowhere close to being authorized, or the leadership has said, there are really strong feelings about it, but please come in and talk about advanced care planning, because no matter where people are, this is something we all need. And so that's often something that I'll do. I'll leave information for everything. And I always, in full disclosure, like this is a part of our work, but it's not all of it. We really want you to be thinking about advanced care planning. All right. I'm going to stop the share, and then we can talk through it. The questions. All right. Awesome. Suzanne.
Mitz?
Oh, Mitz.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You go ahead. Mitz, go ahead. Hey, Mitz.
Oh, hi. Isabella, could you just touch briefly on the FAT advocacy?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So that is you can't totally see, but I'm a fat person. And I know some people might not be super comfortable with the term fat to describe someone in a bigger body. But it is a term that a lot of us who are fat, and a lot of advocacy organizations like NAFA, which is the National Associations for Fat Acceptance, uses. So you can get comfortable with the term. I know it's not always easy for people, but if you hear me say it, I mean it in the most neutral way possible, as an adjective. What I found when I got into death work was that a lot of doulas, a lot of resources, a lot of people specializing in end of life care were not meaningfully including fat people in their resources. And for a lot of fat people and their loved ones, the needs are just different at end of life. And no matter how people feel about fat as an identity, or whether or not people should be fat or should stay fat, or any of those kind of concerns, which certainly come up in the work that I do. The fact of the matter is that when people are coming to the end of their lives, their bodies typically are as they are. And a lot of people who are larger don't experience the same quality of end of life care. And we see that reflected in hospice utilization. We see that reflected in diagnosing treatable illnesses or other concerns that come up that would have potentially prevented death, or I mean, not forever, but prevented death in that moment, or led to a kind of a higher quality of life for people until they come to the end of their lives. And then we also see it certainly when people have already passed. So you see stories, which many of you are familiar with, that are fictionalized, perhaps like The Whale, which came out recently, or What's Eating Gilbert Grape. When there was so much shame around moving the mother once she had passed, that they set the house on fire to avoid the kind of shame of having to coordinate her burial. And so that's fictionalized, but it's a very actually kind of common concern and outcome for people who are in bigger bodies. So I do resource planning around that kind of planning for that, and being really honest about what the circumstances are, thinking about alternatives to burial and cremation if those are too cost prohibitive, or you don't have the kind of access to an extra large crematorium, or if you don't have kind of friendly or compassionate funeral care providers in your area. So those alternatives may be natural burial, maybe having a home funeral, or having your loved ones help to process the body to the greatest extent possible. And then I also kind of tap into the theological questions that come up. There's a great book by Candida Moss, who's a scholar, that talks a lot about, if you're a Christian, this idea of a body being, your body kind of going with you into heaven. Is that body a fat body when you're in heaven with God? And for some people, the answer is no. And for some people, the answer is yes. So that's something that comes up a lot is this body a mutable part of you? How does that change the way you think about the end of life, the afterlife? So I really try to tap into all of those things. So there's a lot going on there. And I know that might be very new territory for some people, but if you have any questions or want to talk more about it, you can, I can put my email in the chat, and I would love to talk to you if you are fat, or if you have a loved one who's fat.
I just want to add that, and this is just getting into personal territory, but I had a family member who died recently. It's been since I've known Isabella, and they are fat. They were fat, and I was able to ask the questions that I needed to about end of life care and disposition that I would not have had the language for without Isabella. And I'm like, my family was so grateful. Everybody was so grateful. And even the funeral professionals were grateful that we were asking the questions and talking it through. And so, yes, Isabella is going to do a webinar for our larger CNC community. And so I can't wait for that, because I think that's information and language that we all need. Okay, I saw a mention of the secular healthcare directive. That's so important. Thank you so much for lifting that up, Suzanne. Let's see. I'm just looking through the questions here. I missed it.
Marcia, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a question, but I also wanted to first mention that last evening I watched the webinar of the spirituality of grief, which was your interview, Zena, with Reverend Fran Shelton, and I found it very moving. I bought the book, and that could possibly go on the list of resources that were came up in one of the previous on one of the slides today, because it's a reverend talking about exactly what you're talking about, and the two of you, I just loved it. It was very comforting and uplifting. And the other one that I saw, which is not totally, it's a little bit of a tangent from this particular presentation, was I happened to see the interview with Susie Flack of the death of her son a year and a half or so ago. And the fact that, I'm here in California, and it was a 6-minute YouTube of a mother's experience of losing her son in a state that has not passed medical aid in dying. And I just realized how insular we can be, and not aware of this bigger picture. And somehow, even though I read statistics of how many states have passed medical aid in dying, but somehow hearing the story of a mother and her experience and her crusade now to her own work now to pass medical aid in dying in Illinois, it was a tremendously moving experience, which is just another way in for all communities, really. So thank you to Compassion and Choices for these resources. And my question is, I see there's Catholics for Compassion. Has there been any success with Adventists for Compassion? I live in an area where all the health facilities are run by Adventists, and while I understand that not all the practitioners within that system are Adventists and feel an array of ways as how they can support or not. In the fine print of Adventist documents they do not support medical aid in dying. So I'm just curious what inroads have been made by Compassion and Choices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And I will pass on to Fran. I love Fran, and she's become one of my good friends. So she will love hearing that so much. That's such a great question. We started with Catholics for Compassion. We're launching a Jewish Leaders for Compassion. Well, they're going to have a different name, but that's a council that we're working on. But what we haven't specifically had inquiries about Adventists for Compassion, but what we have had is a lot of inquiries about creating a toolkit to navigate religious affiliated hospitals and hospices. Like, how do people do that, and how do they ask questions? How do they really alert people to their secular healthcare directive? So that's something we're working a lot on, is just helping people be able to navigate, because there are a lot of communities that only have a religiously affiliated hospital, and they are struggling with having their needs met at end of life. And so that's something we're definitely working on. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to sound so naive when I say this, but I did not grow up with any type of religion or anything like that. And until I started working at Compassion and Choices and learning about how they have the religious directives at hospitals, I always thought that Dignity Health just meant they would treat me with dignity. I didn't realize that was like, maybe I should not go there if I want the care that I want, So I do think that's important. I know somebody mentioned, I think, our form that we have in here, the Sectarian Healthcare Directive. So that is in our toolkit that we have that you can fill out. But it is, something to think about. A friend of mine had a baby, and I was like, where are you going? And she said, either Banner or Dignity. And I was like, you should go to Banner. Just be safe. And both provide great care, but just in case something goes wrong. So, yeah, go ahead, Sina. Sorry,
That's exactly it. And another like bee in my bonnet that I love to talk about is how hospices can be religiously affiliated and you don't really know it. And so part of interviewing a hospice is all of that stuff. I worked for hospice for 10 years, and I love the work that hospices do, but there can really be some sneaky religious undertones to different things. If we, you know, if people aren't aware and don't know what to look for. And so anyway, that's something I also talk about. Like, even if something says they're like claims to be secular, they can like force different religious beliefs on folks. So just being aware of that.
Somebody just asked in the chat if they can buy the death deck through CNC. So they are their own little business, but they do give us a 20% off code. I put the link in there. And if you just put in choices 20, then you can get 20% off too.
And we are having our own branded CNC death decks pretty soon, and you'll be able to order them on our website, but that'll be a little bit down the road, but yeah. All right. Oh, Mitz.
The Catholic Church has the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services that came out in 2009 that says that there's no obligation for extra or disproportionate care. There's no requirement to be kept on a ventilator or this, that, and the other. Isn't at least my kind of random experience has been some of the people I've spoken with are not aware of that. Any comments about the Catholic directive that says you can forego extra burdensome or extraordinary care?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Mitz. We did a Catholics for Compassion, Living and Dying to Your Faith and Conscience webinar. I'll find the link and stick it in there. And we had some Catholic theologians just talk about that, like that you do not have to have all this, you don't have to have care that you do not want. And so, yeah, that was a very important distinction that they upheld, that, when you look to this, that's exactly what they said. Yeah.
No, not known by, we need to get that word out.
Yeah.
Someone needs to. It's like,
Yes. That's part of our Catholics for Compassion mandate, is getting that word out to other Catholics, because often they said it takes Catholics to speak to other Catholics about these issues, and so that's part of our charge, is making sure people know that they are allowed is not the right word, but yeah, there definitely, you're allowed to live and die according to your beliefs and your conscience and your priorities. So thank you for that, Mitz. I think I missed, Maureen, your question about the UMC, United Methodist Church. I have worked with individual congregations in the United Methodist Church who have been really receptive to CNC and also to medical aid in dying. As a denomination, I haven't had a whole lot of luck, in the larger denomination, but definitely individual congregations have been very open to us. And the UCC has been an amazing partner for us. We have, and we're working hard on getting a general resolution in the UCC denomination. All right. Any other questions? Anything I missed? Y'all are amazing. You're good. All right, I'm going to stick my email in the chat, and I would love, seriously, I would love to be in contact. If you have specific questions about congregations, or even if you're like, I'd love to host a death cafe or something, but I need a little bit of a budget, like to provide food or something, like, let me know. These are things that our engagement team loves to support. Oh, Judith.
Oh, Judith, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. This is for Isabella. I came across your information while researching about death doulas, and I copied it all down, and
I want to give it to a minister that I know, but I'm kind of shy about doing it because, you know, the whole thing about that's not a good word to use, you know, and so I just wondered if you can convince me that I'm able to do that.
Well, I absolutely, if you want me to email them, if you want to email me privately and we can email together, or I'm happy to support you in getting that email sent. If you are not comfortable to use fat yet, you can use larger bodied or bigger bodied, whatever you're comfortable with, and we will make baby steps. But yes, absolutely. Fat people deserve to be included meaningfully in end of life care, in theological discussions and spiritual discussions in all of those communities. The majority of Americans are in larger bodies, and that's a reality. Like I said, whether or not people agree with it or are comfortable with it, it is a fact. And fat people deserve compassionate care and to have all the same access as anybody else in any other body. So I really hope, Judith, that you do send that email, and I would love to be a part of that conversation. So if you want to
Okay,
email me
yeah.
privately, if you want to do a pep talk or whatever, you reach out and we'll get that email sent.
Well, I'm working on it. And once you get into it, you know, you get to do what you thought you couldn't. And so, yeah, I just, and also that she's a minister, so, you know, it's kind of a higher authority. I just don't, I'm just kind of shy about it.
If you're, a great person, I'll recommend to everyone. It's a great book. I'm literally using it to pop up my laptop right now, so I have a better angle. I'm vain like that. Is Fat Church by Anastasia Kidd, who is a UCC minister and works closely with the university, Unitarian Universalist, excuse me. She's great. So she's a minister and she's using fat left, right, and center. So if you want to recommend, start with those kind of things. Another like language with Death Fat Doula, Fat Church. There are lots of people in this realm who are trying to include fat people in these theological conversations.
Yeah, it is a Unitarian Universalist church, and also in conversation.
Oh, well, the UUs are so progressive. They'll love it.
I know, I love it. And also she used the word fat shaming when we were talking about something, and so,
Sounds like an ally. I think you should send the email and but if you want to email me, we can talk about it. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Of course.
Bye.
All right, team. Thank you so much for this afternoon. This has been really great. And I am really grateful for all of y'all's support and all that you do to champion our cause. So seriously, please be in touch if you have any questions or anything that we can do.